He was addicted to drugs, and his addiction killed him before he reached adulthood. My beautiful, talented, kind, musical son was a drug addict, and our whole family loved him very, very much. He was much more than his disease. This is what a drug addict looks like.
This is the story of Henry Granju, an 18-year-old boy who lost a long battle with drug addiction. It's a story that's been heard around the world through his mother's blog. It's the story of how prescription drug abuse can destroy the most promising of lives. And it's a story that could play out in any home, including yours. This is Henry's story.
He was a beautiful baby. He was the most beautiful thing we'd ever seen.
He was the first grandchild, and so it was a big, big deal, and the whole family, gathered around. And I remember when he was just a couple weeks old, we were all sitting around, and he was on the floor, and we were all sitting around just looking at him saying, oh, isn't he wonderful, isn't he fabulous? And then my uncle started singing a song, "Oh, Come Let Us Adore Him," because he was the one, and he was the golden child.
He was very shy when he was young, and really, I guess he was always shy. Needed a lot of prodding, or a lot of leading to get him to get involved with things like sports and plays and things like that.
Our kids have all, grown up together as best friends, just like siblings. They're as close as siblings are, and so it's hard sometimes, I think, for people to understand why it's hitting us so hard, because a lot of families, aunts and uncles and cousins, you're close in your family, but this is different.
He was one of the first students at Episcopal School of Knoxville, one of their founding class in first grade, and stayed there through 8th grade, and made some friends there who, I expected to be his friends forever. There was a really tight group there. His teachers loved him. He was spelling bee winner and did history fair. He was a Boy Scout or Cub Scout. But once he picked up a guitar at about 11, that was that. That was what he was into. And he did take lessons later, starting when he was about 14, but before that he could already play pretty well. He was completely self-taught and pretty gifted, I think.
We had a lot of fun playing music together. We would play guitar, or one of us would play drums.
Rock and roll, and then jam band, I guess. Yeah. I'd play guitar.
And we all thought, of course, he'll grow up like the rest of us, and he'll go to college, and he'll have girlfriends, and he'll get married, and we'll be at his wedding, and I would be at the birth of his first baby. Wasn't supposed to end like this.
Well, we had a very tough divorce, and it was very hard on Henry, and it took Chris and me a long time to figure out how to co-parent as divorced parents, which I think we do really well now. And that process of learning to do it, Henry suffered for it.
It hit him hard. It hit him. He had this idea of this idyllic family where everything was good and everything was perfect and safe, and then felt like it wasn't.
We got married in the same month, and his mom got married in the same month. He had a lot of changes. He was going to high school that same month for the first time. He had a lot of things going on.
He expressed that, he said that, but I think that's definitely a factor in how he was feeling.
He actually came to me one night after his little brother and sister had gone to bed. He was 14, and he was crying and said, "I have to tell you something, Mom. I did something really, really bad. You're going to be really mad at me." And I said, "You know what?" And I said, "Let's go sit down on the porch and talk about it." And I remember every detail of this conversation. And he was bawling. He felt really bad. And he said, "I smoked pot." And I said, I couldn't believe it, but I was trying to stay calm. And I said, "You know what?" And he said, "I only did it twice. I'm never going to do it again. I didn't enjoy it, and I feel really bad about it, and I understand that you're going to have to punish me, and I'm so, so sorry."
At that time, it seemed more like what you'd expect for, sort of some mischief, but not anything that would be, the problem that it was.
Probably his freshman year. I mean, we'd heard, that he had smoked pot a few times, and not really about drinking at all. Nothing about pills or anything else at that point.
They'd come home and, they'd be high, and they'd sit on the porch and they'd sing and they'd play their guitars, and just good kids. And Henry, especially, he was quieter. He was a little different.
And he told me later, when he was about 17, that the first time he smoked pot, he thought to himself, oh, this is what I'm supposed to feel like. And he was only 14, and he was that aware of that it triggered something in him that he could never then again turn off.
Lots of kids go through this and they experiment and we're going to take care of it. And then I guess it slowly, you assume that all the things you're doing are going to stop it from happening or going any further. And then it slowly turns into a situation where you realize at some point, oh my goodness, not only did they not stop, it's escalated.
By the time he was in 9th grade, he was smoking a lot of pot, beginning to use hallucinogens, beginning to trade and sell pot to get money to buy drugs. And I didn't understand what was going on.
I'm older. I didn't get it. I'm not naive. I mean, I've had a career. I didn't do enough, and I lie in bed and think about that. Although I also think I don't know what I could have done. I did not know what to do.
There's probably about a 2.5 year period where I made arrangements for him to see counselors and talk to people.
It was sort of like a slow drip, 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 and I couldn't quite get a handle on what was going on. One day I was pretty sure that was what was going on, and other times I wasn't.
He would go for a few sessions, and then he'd miss a session, go a little bit more, and I actually had one counselor. He said, I just can't do anything for him. He just seems like he's sad, but there's nothing else. There's nothing wrong with him.
He was a great kid, and it's not, if you were to run into him on the street, you wouldn't have said, oh, that's a drug addict. You would have thought, well, that's a cute little boy. He's kind of cool looking with his little curly hair, and if you ever listened to him play the guitar, then you would never, ever have thought that he was a drug addict.
I think experimenting with his friends turned into an addiction so quickly for him that he just lost control of the situation. He couldn't stop once that whatever it is, that switch got flipped in his brain, and from that point on, he wanted to stop, but he couldn't.
It was just a very clear progression. It was pot, then hallucinogens, party drugs, ecstasy, LSD, mushrooms, and then it was pills. And once he got involved with pills, that was it.
The most excruciating, painful, heartbreaking, wrenching, and also infuriating, frustrating, maddening feeling, powerless feeling.
Essentially, we kidnapped him one day. We told him that he was going to see a doctor in West Knoxville, and then Chris continued driving him to Asheville, and with him yelling and hollering the whole way, which was very unlike Henry. He was not like when he was angry, he would tend to be moody and not yelling, but he was furious.
Sending him for treatment, that we had to say to the kids, here's what's going on. You need to understand that Henry's sick and he needs help, and we need to all try to help him. And it opened a door for us to talk to our kids about drugs.
I talked to him, I wrote to him, I sent him packages when he was away with little notes and pictures and encouraging words, but I felt helpless. I felt helpless, and I felt hopeful. I really thought Henry was bright enough and surrounded by enough love and support that he would come out of the treatment program, come out on the other end, and we'd have Henry back.
I later found out he drank the night he came home from treatment, and within a few days was smoking pot again. In a last-ditch attempt for him to get clean, he came to me and said, I'm going to go to Bell Buckle, and I think I can kick this in Bell Buckle. There won't be drugs there, and no one will be calling me and tempting me. And I think if I go to Bell Buckle, I can and stay with Uncle Robert, I can get a job. And so he went for a couple of weeks, and he went through withdrawals there, but eventually after a couple of weeks, he came back.
Henry believed he was immortal. He believed that all of this pressure to get him to change was nonsense. He didn't see the risks. The physical addiction was gone by the time he got back from rehab. He did not use drugs in rehab, but he just thought all of this was silly hype. He didn't see it as a big deal at all. And so when you don't fear death, when you're 18 years old and you don't have the experience, none of your friends have ever died, you've never seen death, and so you don't fear it. And so I think he slipped back into it pretty comfortably.
Just started going away more and more.
Very much a loving brother. I think towards the end, he was, really felt shame, felt bad about, what the drugs had done to their relationship. And a lot of our more recent family memories, he's not in them because he was somewhere else. And I think he felt bad about that.
For the next 9 months or so until he died, he was either staying at his grandparents', but more as sort of a squatter or out on the streets, sleeping on couches. I don't think he ever stayed at one of the homeless shelters, but I know he hung out around. He was becoming a street person. By the end, that's what we were looking at, is he was becoming a street person. We got a postcard with no signature on it, addressed to Henry at this address, and it said, in code language, but it was, not very good code language. It was, I want to buy some of the drugs that you discussed with me. And honestly, as hard as it was, when Henry overdosed and when he died, getting that postcard that day and realizing what we were looking at was almost as bad, because that was the moment. That moment was the one where I knew we were looking at a situation where Henry was either going to get clean or die. The worst of times. April 28, 2010, 6:40 a.m. Please pray for my sweet son Henry, who is in critical condition following a major drug overdose and a brutal assault.
I hurt myself today.
He is on a ventilator and in a medically induced coma to try to bring down widespread swelling in his brain due to a period of time with low oxygen. He aspirated and his lungs are injured badly. The next few days are critical for him. Thank you all so much for your healing thoughts and prayers. Hug your babies tight. At about 12:15, I got a call from Henry's phone saying, so I thought it was Henry, so I answered. And it was some woman, and she was calm when she spoke to me, saying, "You don't know me, but your son's just been taken to UT Hospital with an overdose, and it doesn't look good."
I think I went into shock, actually. I couldn't find the hospital. And I've lived here all my life, but I finally got there and went back, and it was medical people everywhere.
And I picked up the phone and I called my brother because I saw his text saying, "Call me right now." And he told me what was going on. I thought, I must have sensed something was wrong with him, because I couldn't stop thinking about him that morning and talking about him and trying to figure out how to help him.
He wasn't dead, but he was nearly dead, and he looked just terrible. I mean, it's your worst. He was black and blue. He was on a respirator. He had blood coming out his ears. He was obviously comatose. He was in a coma. And everyone was working frantically over him, trying to keep him alive. The doctor took us aside, the ER doctor, and said, "We're going to take him for a CAT scan, but what we can tell you right now is he's clearly overdosed. He has clearly been assaulted. either of these things could kill him, and it doesn't look good, but you know, we're going to do our very best.
If you have a hypoxic episode or a lack of oxygen to your brain for only 6 minutes, you can have irreparable damage to your brain.
I guess we stayed there for a few hours. I really don't know. I guess all the family convened pretty quickly at the hospital, and probably by sometime that night, he was in the ICU in a medically induced coma.
I'm a case manager here at University of Tennessee Medical Center. I work on 7 South, which is a neuro floor. And I received Henry out of intensive care into a room on 7 South. I had been told that he was a young drug overdose patient and that he was going to need drug rehab.
And everything was trending a little better. I mean, he was in critical condition, but every day, and then the 3rd day, he started to wake up. And I was away from the hospital for a few hours, and I got a call saying, Henry's awake and he's talking. May 1st, 2010, 11:10 a.m. He woke up. This morning, Henry is talking some, although his focus and memory and attention are not what we will look for in the weeks ahead as he heals. When he said, "Hi, Mama," when I first saw him this morning, I began jumping up and down and hollering with joy, tears streaming down my face, an entertaining sight when someone is as ginormously pregnant as I am. But those words were, without question, the most important, beautiful words I've ever heard another human being utter. And I will never forget that feeling of hearing my son say them as long as I live. Best words ever.
When I first went in the room, he made eye contact. He was this skinny kid in the bed with a big mop of curly dark hair and big brown eyes, but also demonstrated behaviors of anoxic brain injury, head injury.
Still really, really sick, but a lot better than he'd been a few days ago. Still in a neck brace and bleeding from his ears, and but he was able, I think by then, you know, he's obviously breathing on his own and off the ventilator.
Let me be clear that by the last 8 to 12 weeks of Henry's life, he was a junkie. He had just started shooting up. He told his friends at Laurel that the day before he had gotten beat up and robbed during a drug buy. Someone called him during dinner, and then he said to his friend Ryan, because Henry didn't have a car, "Hey, can you take me to meet somebody on, I guess, John Sevier?" And Ryan said, "Man, you are really in bad shape. You need to call your mother. You may need to go to the emergency room." And Henry said, no, I'm fine. I really have to go meet these people. They're helping me. He said that these people are helping me, and they're giving me work, and I have to go meet them. I know the work involved selling drugs, and it may have involved some other stuff. You know, I think at that point, Henry was willing to do almost anything to get high. The next morning, a friend of his named Savannah got a phone call at mid-morning from some woman. The number was Henry's, so she answered it. And it was some woman using Henry's phone screaming at her that Henry was blue and cold and passed out in her house, and she wanted to know what she was supposed to do. And Savannah's like, "I don't know who you are, why are you calling me?" And the woman explained that Savannah's number had been the last one Henry had dialed, and so she tried her. And Savannah said, "Well, if he's passed out and blue and cold, you need to call 911. When the ambulance got there, he was almost dead. April 30th, 2010, 7:20 a.m. The neurology consult this afternoon was a bit of a downer, for me anyway. The neurologist told us that we should be optimistic but realistic regarding Henry's prognosis for a full neurological recovery. The injury to his brain was significant, and unfortunately only time will tell us what outcome we're going to see. Of course, I assume the best, but have terror of the other possibilities.
The first thing they were concerned was about Henry's drug rehab. But usually when you have a situation like that, once you realize the person has brain damage, then they need the physical rehab first.
He was so happy to see everybody. You know, all his cousins came to visit, and we did try to keep any friends away who we thought had also used drugs with him, but the friends we felt like hadn't came to visit, and he smiled and he was so happy, and we began trying to help him get up and sit in a chair, and he started physical therapy. He never walked again. He never got out of a wheelchair, but we were working on it.
We just got through it by staying really busy and trying to plan how we're going to deal with everything. You know, Katie was pregnant and we all have little kids, and most of our family lives in Middle Tennessee, and so it took a lot of coordinating to make sure that he was never alone. We never wanted him to be alone, and he wasn't. He was never alone the entire 5 weeks.
Everybody noticed something, but it was hard to say because it's, you know, he was obviously, we were all becoming aware of how extensive the damage was. It really made him sad and really frustrated him, and he was getting angry. Whereas at first I think he was really, really happy that he made it alive, and that we all thought he was going to be okay.
He was only speaking in single words, but then he just stopped speaking at all. You know, he'd just stare.
Sometimes people will recover from that. Like their brain will have an initial hypoxic injury. The brain, the neurons, the cells of the brain that help you think and keep everything working are damaged to a point, and then they recover. And this recovery can be permanent. People can do well with that. But sometimes people actually then start to decline again. And it can cause people to have movement problems, people to have psychiatric problems, and sometimes can lead to cerebral edema or brain swelling and then death. And that's called the delayed post-hypoxic leukoencephalopathy.
Nothing really seemed to make any difference. You know, whatever was going on was just more powerful than any kind of medicine.
And I went back, and I went back like 7 times. I kept going back and giving him a kiss because I guess at the time I didn't realize, but now I know that I knew that that would be the last time I saw him. And I gave him one more kiss, and I walked out, and I never got to see him again. It was awful.
My brother Robert, his Uncle Robert, was staying with him that night, and Henry had barely spoken for several days, and he was just lying in bed moaning, and Robert said, well, can I get you something? Do you want a drink of water? Do you want a cool cloth on your head? And Henry just kept going, no, no, no. And Robert said, well, Henry, what do you want? And this was like at 3 in the morning, and he turned to Robert, he like turned his head, and he said, I just want to be free.
Take him away, Lord. Take away these chains from me. My heart is broken 'cause my spirit's not free. Lord, take away these chains from me.
And, you know, I think that meant a lot of things. I think it meant the obvious that he was ready to move on, but I think it also meant that he was ready to leave all of those troubles related to his drug abuse behind.
Henry's brother, Elliot, and sisters, Jane and Charlotte, as well as the new baby sister who will soon join our family, have lost their role model, guide, entertainer, and dearest friend.
I lost my oldest child on May 31st, and my youngest child was born 3 weeks later on June 27th. There are really no words to describe that mixture of the greatest joy a parent can feel, which is the birth of a new baby, and the greatest sorrow that a parent can feel, which is the loss of a child, coming so close together. I'm still struggling with how to describe it to myself.
It's such a gift to have new life, and I think more than anybody, it's been good for all the cousins and siblings. They really needed to know that when you're going through all this pain and grief, you can also be happy and celebrate a new life. And that's a lesson that I've wanted them to have since the day that I had to sit all of them down and tell them that Henry died, which was maybe the hardest thing I've ever done.
It's very embarrassing, you know, as a parent, to admit that one of your children has a terrible problem that many people associate with bad parenting. That's not a fun thing to talk about.
Yeah, I think knowing that, you know, the bright kid that, you know, went to a private school and, you know, didn't grow up on the streets and all that stuff, you know, could could have been anybody's son. Could end up, addicted to these horrible, soul-gripping drugs. Maybe that's the message.
And I just think it's really important for parents not to believe, as I did, that it can't happen to your beautiful child and your beautiful family. It can.
It can happen to any kid. It's not like something tragic went wrong and he turned to drugs suddenly.
I hope teachers, parents, neighbors, peers, other teenagers will not treat it like something that shouldn't be discussed, but will just, in law enforcement, but will deal with it just head on and realize it's killing our children.
There's a terrible drug problem here, and as a community, we have got to open our eyes to it and figure out what to do about it.
There is a serious problem that is a new problem, and this problem didn't exist 20 years ago. Major, horrible narcotics of the type that normally are associated with, when most people think of them, junkies shooting up on the streets, those exact same chemicals are available in pill form to all of your children.
I really felt like, to a large degree, we were alone with this problem, and it turns out I was never alone. By being quiet, I kept us alone, and I wish I'd talked about it sooner. Another writer I know in New York City started having her friends take pictures of Henry's name in front of fascinating or beautiful landmarks all over the world. And it just I started putting those pictures on my blog, and they just started pouring in from everywhere. So since Henry does not get to travel now, I love the idea of these pictures that people are providing, taking Henry all over the world, and I think he would too. He would love those.
Let it be. Let it be.
July 5th, 2010. Henry only lived on this earth for 18 years. He suffered terribly for the last few years of his short life. He didn't want to be a drug addict, and he certainly didn't want to see any other kids become addicts. I know that he would want me to make a lot of noise about this silent epidemic that's stealing our children, that stole him from us. I'm trying to figure out the best way to do this to honor my sweet child, whom I miss so much today that I feel like my heart may explode.
But though they may be parted, there is still a chance that they will see. There will be an answer. Let it be. 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 Yeah,